I don't have a lathe in my shop, but I wasn't about to let that stop me from making a bowl. So you're probably asking yourself, how in Norm Abrams' beard are you going to make a bowl without a lathe? Well, it won't be your typical bowl. Instead, it'll be comprised of multiple pieces that once assembled will give it a bowl shape in the end. Now, you won't be able to eat your Lucky Charms out of this bowl, but it'll still be great as a fruit bowl or a bread bowl or even as a centerpiece. The pieces that make up the bowl kind of resemble a rib cage, so I'm calling this thing the skeleton bowl. All right, let's make it. First, I used my track saw to rip off a section of this walnut slab that I had. I made several passes, slightly increasing the depth of the cut until eventually I bottomed out the saw. Then I could flip it over and make one final cut to fully cut off the piece that I needed. Now, if you're wondering why some idiot is cutting up a nice slab in order to make a small wooden bowl, well, here's why. So as you can see, this slab was not going to be good for like a desktop or a table or anything like that, because it has this knot, which is actually the pith of the tree, running all the way through the slab, and it's got these cracks around it, which is pretty unusual actually. So my plan is to just cut it down the center, and then I'm going to mill up and resaw and then book match the sides over here to get some usable lumber, and then this centerpiece will be discarded. So after a few passes right up the middle, I was finally able to separate it into two halves. Next, I put each piece onto a sled, shimmed it where necessary to keep them from wobbling, and then ran them through the planer to get one flat face. And then referencing that flat face against the side, I pushed each one of them across the joiner to give me one perfectly square corner. With that done, it was time to resaw them down into usable sized boards. I was able to make 4 cuts, which ended up giving me a total of 6 boards. Then I just spread them out across my bench so that I could take a look at all the bad parts that I needed to cut out. But first, I went ahead and I removed all the bandsaw marks and got each piece down to its final thickness over at the planer. I trimmed off all the ugly bits from each piece and then re-squared up the edges over at the joiner. And at this point, I could glue the pieces up into several panels and get them ready to carve. Once they were dry, I scraped off the glue squeeze out, brought it over to the CNC, and clamped it down into place. So I designed this bowl in Fusion 360, and what's really handy is that I can export all the G-code for the CNC and then have the easel software from Inventables import it all and cut it out for me with just a few clicks. Now Inventables offers 3 different sizes of their X-Carve CNC, and I have the mid-sized one, and this allows me to carve something up to about 21 inches across, which is perfect for little projects like this. And their website let me completely customize my machine to make it just the way I want, so that I could add all the bells and whistles and racing stripes and spoilers that I had to have immediately, while also letting me keep it affordable and upgradable in the future. All of this to say it's a fun little machine to play with, and it certainly has been very versatile and a useful addition to my shop. I'd have to say that one of the best things about it is that it frees me up to do something else in the shop. So I can organize some wood cutoffs on my lumber rack, or watch MacGyver and see how Richard Dean Anderson stops a terrorist attack with nothing but a slinky and a stale burrito. The point is, having a CNC is great. The efficiency and the precision is wonderful, but to me at least, the best part is the time saved. I'll leave some links down in the video description to where you can go and check them out if you'd like to. As you probably guessed, this ring is the top part of the bowl, and the final step in this carve is to drill out all the holes for reinforcement dowels that we'll add later. And with that, the first piece is done. Now for all the ribs, I tried to nest them together as much as I could to cut down on waste. I just printed out templates for them and made a mark where the home position for the CNC should be. Lined up the bit with the mark, and kicked off the carve. There's only 9 total ribs in the bowl, and since I could position them pretty closely, I didn't even end up using all the walnut panels I had prepared. Now, if you recall, the top ring extended to just about the full width of the walnut panel we made, which put the two sides of it into the sapwood. I really like seeing the transition from the sapwood to the heartwood and the top ring, and I thought I could accentuate it further by cutting the side ribs out of sapwood as well. So that's what I'm doing here. This was totally a shot in the dark for me. I wasn't sure this was going to work out the way that I was envisioning, but I figured that if I screwed it up, I could always cut out a couple more pieces if I had to. Now that all the pieces were cut out, I took a couple minutes and trimmed up all the leftovers and separated them into pieces that I can use for other projects and pieces that I could roast marshmallows over. I was able to save a lot, actually, and the only bits I ended up tossing were the ones with cracks and checks and knots or were just too small. Next up was adding a round over to the top ring and to each of the ribs. And then it's on the sanding. Oh, the sanding. I sanded each rib up to 220, because I knew that once I assembled it all, it would be very difficult to do it after the fact. With everything all nice and smooth, I could glue the ribs into place. I used my little glue stabber tool and made sure to get an even coating, and then mashed each one of the ribs into their respective dados. I didn't bother clamping since it was a tight fit. The only real important thing I had to make sure of was that they were evenly spaced to the outer edges of the top ring. And then I just popped them all into place. When that was all dry, I could bring it over to the drill press and extend each of the holes down into the ribs to get ready for the dowel inserts. Now you can definitely just go and buy yourself some dowels from the store, but as you know, I tend to overcomplicate and make things difficult for myself, so I'll be making my own. I start by ripping down some stock so that it's just over a 1/4 inch square. Then I chuck it into my drill, and at the belt sander I can put a point on the end. And then I can run it up the edge of the sander and soften all the corners. I sharpened up a chisel to the point where I could split an atom, and then I clamped it onto my dowel making jig, which is basically just a hole drilled into a piece of hardwood with a notch cut out. Then I just drive it into the front, and a perfectly sized dowel comes out the back. It's an easy way to make my own dowels, and it enables me to make them from any wood that I have on hand. Over at the bandsaw, I can cut up the dowels into smaller pieces. And then at the belt sander, I can add a small chamfer on one of the ends. At this point, we're good to put in the dowels. So I put on a thin coat of glue and then send them home with some taparoos. To trim off the excess, I just use my multi-tool and I flush cut them to the top of the bowl. Then with a random orbital sander, I could smooth out the top ring and get it looking real nice. Now to trim off some of the protruding edges of the ribs, I chose to use my rotary tool with a sanding bit and just ground them down smooth. This also allowed me to round over the top edges of each rib to give them a much more natural look and feel. Then to smooth the outside of the bowl, I just used my disc sander and I ground it all flush with the outer edge of the top rim. But this introduced some new edges that needed to be round over, so I used my rotary tool again and I shaped each of the ribs so that they all looked very organic. I spent a lot of time sanding, and I got all the edges knocked down and all the bumps smoothed out. And now it's time for magic to happen. I love the contrast between the walnut and the maple dowels. It's such a nice accent. And the dark color of the walnuts just seems to jump out at you once the finish goes on, doesn't it? Man, it sure turned out awesome. I really like how the sides are all sapwood, and then it transitions to the heartwood in the center and then back to sapwood. It almost makes it look like the entire thing was carved out of a single block of wood. And the shape of the ribs gives it a very organic and fluid feel. Now some of you might be thinking, well, yeah, it's cool, but you had to use a CNC to make it. Well, this next segment is just for you. I'm going to make another one, but using traditional tools this time. No CNC, just to show you that it can be done. It's not as easy or as quick, but it can be done. Check it out. I print out all the templates and arrange them just right and stick them down onto my board. Then over at the bandsaw, I cut out each one of the ribs, making sure to stay just on the outside of the lines. At the spindle sander, I can clean off all those bandsaw marks and then sneak up to the line on each piece. Then I add the roundovers at the router table, and the ribs are ready. Now to make the top ring, I set my table saw fence to exactly 12 inches, and then I cut my panel to width. Then with a dado stack in place, I can plow a channel right down the center. After that, I bump the fence over the width of the dado plus my offset, and then plow another channel. Then by flipping the board end for end, I can make another cut which makes equidistant dados. So I continued this technique for all 9 dados, and I ended up with the world's most frustrating cutting board. Then I find center on the panel, and I draw out the circles for the ring. I poked a hole, and then I used my jigsaw to thoroughly burn the snot out of the wood. I'm using oak here, so if I just look at it wrong, it burns. Then over at the spindle sander, I can sand off all those nasty marks and work my way up to the line. Next up, I need to measure and mark the center of each dado on the top of the panel. And with that done, I can now finish cutting out the ring over at the bandsaw, and then remove those bandsaw marks and sneak up to the line over at the disc sander. Now I can make a punch where I need to drill all the holes for the dowels and take care of that over at the drill press. And at this point, all our pieces are created, and assembly is pretty much the same as before. I make the dowels, I glue the ribs in place and extend all the holes. I shape the inside and flush up the outside. 10 years of sanding, and it's time for finish. Man, I didn't think I was going to like this one nearly as much as the other one, but it sure turned out great. Hey, if you'd like to try building this for yourself, I'll have detailed step-by-step plans and templates available on my website, so be sure to check that out. If you've enjoyed the video and you're new to the channel, I invite you to subscribe. If you think I've earned it, give me a thumbs up and tell me down in the comments which one of these bowls you think turned out the best. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Come on! Stupid thing. One of these. Oh, crap. Whoa, hello. Well, crap. Ow! Every time.